The topic is African Americans and reparations, and we're talking to Dr. Al-Hadid, the chairperson of the Africana Studies Department at Tennessee State University. Dr. Al-Hadid, during the first segment, you made the point that reparations is a judicial movement rather than a legislative movement. Let's have you to expand upon that and talk about it from that perspective.
Yes. When the African prisoners of war were brought over here, legally they were defined as chattel of property, and therefore they were disenfranchised by that legal system. Now, once the Emancipation and the Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation, Civil War, once that concluded itself, the pain and suffering and oppression did not go away, because it shifted then to a system of apartheid, in the sense that the legal statutes, primarily in the southern states, indicated that black folks had no rights, that they should go to the back of the bus, that they should drink from the colored water fountain. So a whole segregated, separate social order was set up by a legal system. So now when you're talking in terms of identifying who's culpable in terms of a legal stipulation, you have to look at the government as one of the culpable parties. You would also have to look at the various businesses that profited from this. And I think that's the angle that is being taken. However, I think the legislative and the political is still an important dimension of it. If you look at the case where it's going now, John Conyers, a congressman from Michigan, has put in place a piece of legislation, a bill rather, which indicates that a committee or a commission should be set up to do an assessment of the damage done to people of African descent from 1619 to 1865. Now, on the heels of that, Randall Robinson has put together what is called a reparation assessment group. And in that group, he has some of the stellar African-American attorneys such as Willie Gary, Johnny Cochran, Charles Ogletree, Attorney Sweets. And so what they're doing now is that they're bringing suit against the government. They're bringing suit against specific corporations, such as Aetna Life Insurance, bringing cases against Brown University, and these various businesses that existed during slavery and made profits from slavery. And so they're approaching it, from that angle. Now, when you look at the approach that Malcolm X, or El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz took, he was talking about bringing the United States government before the World Court, and charging it with the crime of genocide. Now, in order to leverage this, he was trying to get the cooperation of African heads of states, in the Middle East and in Islamic countries, and then they would go before the United Nations and the Security Council and make that particular case. And once the case was made, then the United States would be taken to The Hague, where she would be tried in the World Court for crimes against humanity. So you got two legal bases, or two cases that you can make. You can make a case with international law, and then you can make a case with United States case law. So you have two legal venues by which you can prosecute this particular case. Now, however, you're going to need the political apparatus and the mass movement in order to dramatize the issue and bring it to that head, to that climax, the same way Dr. King did it.
It can't reach the court and have the impact that it should without having some kind of broad support from broad political support. Is that what we're saying?
Right, because you never would have gotten the Comprehensive Civil Rights Act, or you never would have gotten the Voting Rights Act had you not dramatized that in society. So I think the political apparatus is important in terms of making the case, and as well as the mass movements, the demonstrations, so forth. And once the case is made, then the final resting place would be in a court, either a domestic court or a national court inside the United States, as well as the World Court. And then when you bring it into the World Court, not only would you be talking about genocide and the need for reparations against people of African descent inside of America, but you would also make the same case for the African continent, as well as countries that were built from people of African descent in the Caribbean, like Jamaica and Trinidad, et cetera.
Well,
so
now,
the whole Caribbean basin and Brazil would be included in that configuration as well, internationally.
Is there any precedent for the government making some kind of compensation or doing anything in that regard to any group or whatever?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. If you look at the reparation that was awarded to the Japanese for the fact that after Pearl Harbor was bombed, December 7th, 1941, I think it was, then they were interred in concentration camps and treated rather badly. Same thing happened with the Chinese once the communists took over in China. And I think also some Germans were put in camps here in this country as well. But definitely the Japanese got reparations. And then we also might look at the Native American Indian. Different nations of Native American Indians, such as the Cherokee, et cetera, they've gotten reparations. We're talking about in the denomination of 30 and 40 and $50 million for the crimes that were committed against them.
And so it's not unusual or unheard of for this to have for that compensation to have been paid.
No, it's not unusual. Not unusual. And I think what people try to do is, in the African American cases, say, well, you know, the statute of limitation has transpired. Why did you wait so long? You know, I mean, we just became conscious to that point. You know, and so as a group, on a mass base. So it's not a matter of waiting too long. I think it's still fresh because white supremacy has not disappeared. The exploitation and the oppression of African Americans has not disappeared. So the vestiges of slavery are very much still with us.
And so those are the things that we would hope to dealing with this whole issue of reparation.
Absolutely.
You know, one of the major problems, I think, in terms of this as an issue has been, and of course we'll make this statement and give you an opportunity during this final segment to deal with this, has been how would this reparation, assuming that something could happen and that it is agreed upon by either the legislative branch or the judicial branch and et cetera, how would this legislation, this reparation be paid? Would it be given, some of the methods of payment, and that's what we want you to deal with. Let's start dealing with that during this segment, and then we'll interrupt you and come back for that final segment to continue that.
Well, there are a number of approaches. I mean, the most talked about approach is some denomination of money, and then you'd have to figure out a formula by which you would appropriate that money. I would assume it would have to be based on appropriating it to families or appropriating it to individuals. But in order to make such a case, you'd have to find someone who's still living who was in slavery, or his parents or grandparents were in slavery, and that they should collect, you know, the reparations for those relatives, you know. So in that regards,
but of course, let us interrupt you here now, Dr. Al-Hadid. But and of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. The topic